A secret recording of King Charles and Queen Camilla's private argument has surfaced, and it has shocked everyone who has heard it. The words spoken in the audio reveal emotions and tensions that were never meant to be public. For years, the royal family has kept their disagreements behind closed doors. But now the world is getting a glimpse of what happens when patience runs out. Who recorded it, and how did it escape the palace walls? The recording raises questions about trust, loyalty, and hidden conflicts. Join us as we uncover the full story and the reactions it caused. The recording that should not exist. Late on a cold Thursday night in early December 2025, a junior digital editor working for a small London news desk received an email that looked ordinary at first glance. The subject line contained only 3 words: "Listen carefully now." He almost ignored it because anonymous messages arrived daily, most of them useless or fake. But something about the attached file made him pause. It was a single audio clip labeled with a recent date, November 29, 2025. He downloaded it out of curiosity, plugged in his headphones, and pressed play. The first seconds were silent, followed by the soft sound of movement and a door closing firmly. Then 2 voices began speaking in low, tense tones. He froze in his chair because those voices sounded very familiar. They resembled the king and queen, though he knew he could not prove that from sound alone. His hands started shaking as the argument grew clearer through the recording. He listened twice without moving, then stood up and locked the office door before playing it again from the beginning. What he heard next did not sound like public figures speaking with careful words. It sounded like 2 tired people arguing in private after a long day. The tone was emotional and raw. There were pauses, raised breaths, and the kind of speech people use only when they believe nobody else can hear them. The editor felt a deep chill because if this recording was real, it was never meant to exist outside that room. He checked the email again, but the sender's address was masked behind random letters and numbers. There was no message, no explanation, no demand, and no threat, just the file. He realized quickly that this was not something he could handle alone. Instead of uploading it into the newsroom system, he copied it onto a small drive, put on his coat, and left the building quietly. He walked 3 streets to the flat of his immediate supervisor, a senior producer who had worked in political media for more than 20 years and understood the danger of sensitive material. The producer listened in silence, his face turning pale as the voices continued. When the clip ended, he did not speak for a full minute. He only said, "This cannot be real, but if it is, this is serious." Within an hour, 2 more senior figures inside the organization had heard the audio. No one suggested publishing it. No one even suggested sending it to legal teams yet. Instead, phones began ringing quietly to trusted contacts who had experience with palace reporting and government affairs. By dawn, word of the mysterious recording had traveled through a very small and careful circle of media professionals who all reacted in the same way. Not excitement, not curiosity, but fear. The existence of the file alone created a problem. If such a private moment had been captured without consent, then it meant someone had been close enough to overhear or record it. That suggested a breach of privacy inside one of the most secure residences in the country. The discussion quickly shifted away from what was said in the argument to how it could have been captured at all. By mid-morning, a former palace correspondent quietly contacted a retired royal aide, asking indirect questions about recent staff changes and unusual movements inside private residences. The aide did not understand the questions at first, but the tone of the call made him uneasy. He promised to make a few discreet inquiries of his own. Before noon, the first quiet alarm had reached the outer edges of palace awareness, though no one inside yet knew the full reason why. Inside royal offices, senior aides began noticing unusual calls from journalists who never asked direct questions but seemed to be testing reactions. A private secretary reported the pattern to a superior, who then informed another office that something strange was circulating in media circles. By early afternoon, a small group of trusted officials were meeting behind closed doors, trying to understand why reporters suddenly seemed cautious and alert at the same time. They did not yet know about the audio, but they sensed that something private was drifting toward public knowledge. It felt like smoke before a fire. The fear was not based on proof, but on instinct built from years of handling delicate royal matters. One aide described the atmosphere as the kind that comes before a storm you cannot see but can feel approaching. They knew that if there truly was a recording, and if it involved a private argument, the damage would not come from scandal alone. It would come from the idea that the most private space in royal life had been exposed without warning. And the question began forming quietly in every worried mind. If someone captured this, what else might they have heard? Where it was recorded and who was nearby? By the time quiet concern reached palace offices, a careful attempt was already underway to imagine where the alleged recording could have been captured without anyone noticing. Officials knew that private conversations between the king and queen usually happened inside a small sitting room connected to their main bedroom suite at Clarence House. On the evening of November 29, 2025, that space had been used after dinner when most staff had withdrawn to their own quarters for the night. The room itself was known for thick curtains, heavy doors, and layered carpets that softened every step. Sound was not meant to travel beyond those walls, and that was why it was often chosen for personal talks. A fireplace stood on one side while two armchairs faced each other near a low table. A reading lamp provided warm light without needing overhead fixtures that might attract attention from outside. According to routine schedules, only a night footman and a protection officer were posted on that floor after 10 o'clock. Both remained stationed near the main corridor and did not enter the private sitting area unless called. Earlier that evening, a housekeeper had delivered fresh linens and turned down the bed before leaving quietly. A valet had placed documents on a desk in the adjoining study around 9:30. After that, movement in the suite became minimal and predictable. This pattern created a question for those trying to understand the recording. If no one entered the room, how could a device have been close enough to capture voices so clearly? One theory suggested that a mobile phone might have been left behind by mistake during earlier duties. Another idea imagined a small voice recorder hidden inside everyday objects like a lamp base or decorative box. Security teams reviewing staff logs found nothing unusual about who had access that day. Every name matched expected duties and recorded times. Attention then turned to windows and ventilation spaces that connected rooms silently. Old buildings sometimes carried sound through narrow passages that were never designed with modern privacy concerns in mind. Engineers quietly inspected vents and wall cavities without explaining the true reason for their interest. They confirmed that while faint noise could travel, it would not create the clear audio heard in the file. This pushed speculation toward the possibility that the recording device had been inside the room itself at the time. That idea unsettled officials the most because it implied human presence rather than accidental capture. They reviewed memories of earlier visitors that day, including advisors, personal staff, and security rotations. Nothing seemed out of place in those recollections. The king had met two aides in the afternoon and later walked briefly in the garden before returning indoors. The queen had spent time reading correspondence and making a short phone call from the study. Dinner had been quiet and taken without guests. By the time they retired upstairs, the household rhythm was calm and ordinary. Investigators considering the puzzle realized that ordinary moments were often when people felt safest and least alert. A forgotten device placed earlier could have remained unnoticed on a side surface or behind furniture until it captured more than intended. This possibility did not require betrayal at that exact hour, but rather an earlier oversight. Still, the thought that something had listened inside their most private space was deeply disturbing. Officials mapped the room on paper, marking chairs, tables, shelves, and light sources, while imagining where sound might bounce or settle. They even measured distances between seating positions to judge how voices could reach a hidden point. Every detail of that quiet evening was revisited slowly and carefully by people trained to notice small things. Yet the answer remained uncertain and troubling. Some began wondering whether the recording had been made not by chance but by design, planned by someone patient enough to wait for the right moment. That thought carried heavier consequences than any technical explanation about forgotten devices or thin walls. Because if intention was involved, then the question changed from how it happened to why it happened at all. And as that realization settled among worried minds, one final doubt refused to fade away. If this room could be listened to without notice, what other spaces might have been vulnerable before anyone understood the risk, and who truly knew the answer already? The silence around this mystery grew heavier with each passing hour inside those guarded walls tonight. Sleep did not come afterward. What Charles said that changed everything. Those who listened to the alleged recording agreed on one detail before anything else. The words spoken by the king did not sound like prepared speech or careful language. They sounded tired, personal, and deeply emotional in a way rarely heard in public life. The voice many believed to be his spoke slowly at first, then with growing force, as if old thoughts that had been held back for years were finally being released without restraint. Listeners described the tone as heavy rather than angry, filled with frustration that seemed to have built up over time. What shocked those early listeners was not shouting or insults, but the honesty in the sentences that unfolded. The words suggested regret about past choices, pressure from public expectations, and private strain that had never been visible outside palace walls. One line in particular, repeated by those who heard it, referred to feeling trapped by a role that allowed no room for personal weakness. That sentence alone carried weight because it sounded like an admission rarely made by someone in such a position. It suggested a struggle between duty and personal emotion that had been hidden behind years of calm appearances. Another statement seemed to question how long certain sacrifices could continue without causing harm to the people involved. That line implied the presence of long-standing tension rather than a single disagreement on that evening. What made these words powerful was the way they pointed to feelings rather than facts. They did not accuse or blame directly, but they revealed exhaustion with a situation that felt unresolved. Listeners sensed that the king was speaking not only about that moment, but about decades of history that had shaped his private life. The tone carried sadness and disappointment mixed with honesty that did not sound rehearsed. Some phrases referred to the difficulty of balancing public image with private truth, a theme that touched on the very foundation of royal life. Those words were interpreted by listeners as deeply personal, but also indirectly connected to the institution he represents. If genuine, they showed how the weight of tradition and expectation could create quiet pressure behind closed doors. One sentence appeared to express fear about how certain matters would be judged if ever exposed to public light. That remark suggested awareness of how fragile trust can be when private matters become known. It also hinted that there were things discussed in that room that were never meant to be heard outside it. The emotional weight of these remarks was what alarmed early listeners. They felt as if they were hearing thoughts that should have remained private forever. What changed everything was the realization that these words, if believed to be real, could affect how people viewed not only the king as a person but also the stability of the role he holds. Because the comments did not sound like passing anger, they sounded like reflections that had been stored quietly for years. The possibility that such reflections existed in private created concern among those who understood how carefully public perception is managed. These remarks seemed to blur the line between personal feelings and constitutional responsibility. They revealed vulnerability in a position where strength is expected at all times. Some listeners noted how the pace of speech changed during the recording, moving from controlled sentences to more rapid phrases that suggested strong emotion. This shift made the moment feel raw and unfiltered. It gave the impression that the speaker had forgotten for a moment where he was and who might hear him. That loss of caution was what made the recording so disturbing to those who heard it. It felt like witnessing a moment never meant to be shared with anyone outside the room. The words did not accuse, but they revealed internal conflict that touched on identity, duty, and personal history. Those themes carry serious weight because they are tied to the trust people place in the monarchy. If the person at the center of that system expresses private struggle so openly, it raises quiet questions about how much pressure is hidden behind calm public appearances. Listeners found themselves thinking not about scandal but about the human cost of living under constant expectation. Yet they also understood how such reflections, if misunderstood, could be twisted into narratives far removed from the original meaning. The fear was not only about what was said but how those words could be interpreted by a world eager for drama. And as those early listeners replayed the clip in their minds, one question began to trouble them more than any other. If these words were truly spoken in confidence, how many other private truths have remained unheard, waiting silently behind closed doors? Camilla's response and the emotion in her voice. Those who listened to the alleged recording said the voice believed to be Camilla's carried a different weight from the beginning. It was calm at first, almost controlled, as if she was trying to keep the moment from growing worse. Her words came slowly, measured, careful, but there was strain beneath that calm surface. Listeners noticed how she paused before answering, choosing each reply with thought rather than speed. The tone suggested someone who had heard similar complaints before and knew where the conversation might lead. There was no surprise in her voice, only recognition. That detail made early listeners uneasy because it implied this was not the first time such feelings had been spoken between them. One reply often repeated by those who heard the clip involved her saying that some matters had been carried quietly for many years. The sentence sounded less like defense and more like exhaustion. She did not raise her voice, yet the emotion could be heard in the way certain words stretched slightly longer than normal. It felt like someone trying to remain composed while standing in old pain. Listeners said there were moments where her breathing changed, becoming deeper before she continued speaking. That pattern gave the sense that memories were being stirred up during the argument. Another line described how public duty had often required silence about personal hurt. This remark stood out because it pointed to sacrifices rarely acknowledged openly. The voice believed to be hers did not sound angry, but deeply tired. That tiredness carried meaning beyond the moment, suggesting years of careful endurance. Some listeners said her replies sounded like someone reopening a conversation paused many times before. There was familiarity in the way she spoke, as though the path of the argument was known already. This sense of history made the recording feel heavier than a simple disagreement. At one point, she appeared to remind him of promises made during earlier difficult periods. The words were gentle but firm, suggesting disappointment rather than anger. That tone revealed emotional depth that could not be faked. It sounded like a lived experience. Listeners believed this showed that the argument was rooted in long memory rather than sudden tension. There were also moments where her voice softened briefly, as if she wanted the conflict to end peacefully. That softness carried a quiet plea for understanding. It suggested that beneath the strain remained a wish for calm. This mix of firmness and gentleness made her responses feel very human. Nothing in the tone sounded rehearsed or artificial. Instead, it felt like two people revisiting old wounds that had never fully healed. Listeners felt they were hearing not just a disagreement, but a history. One part of the recording reportedly included her asking whether certain burdens could ever be set down. That question carried quiet sadness. It hinted that the weight of public life had pressed on private feelings for a long time. The way she said it made listeners feel the depth of that weight. Some noted how her speech slowed near the end of the exchange, as though emotion was making words harder to form. That slowly created a powerful sense of reality. It felt like someone reaching the limit of quiet patience. What struck listeners most was how her voice never turned harsh. Even in disagreement, it carried respect and familiarity. That balance suggested deep connection mixed with deep strain. It reinforced the idea that this was not a sudden clash but the reopening of an old wound. Those who heard the clip came away with the impression that both voices carried history far beyond the moment. Her responses seemed to confirm that private tensions had existed quietly for many years. That realization made the recording feel less like gossip and more like an accidental window into hidden emotion. As listeners replayed her words later, one thought stayed with them. If this argument echoed past conversations, how many times had similar talks happened without anyone knowing? And if such feelings had remained buried for so long, what else might still be hidden behind calm public appearances that people see every day? The history of tension behind palace doors. The walls of old palaces remember more than people think. They hold whispers, sighs, and words spoken in anger that never reach the public ear. For Charles and Camilla, life inside those walls has never been simple. Their story did not begin with joy in the eyes of the world. It began with doubt, judgment, and long shadows from the past. Years before they married, their names were already tied together in controversy. People formed opinions without knowing private truths. That pressure never fully left them. It simply changed shape as time passed. Every public appearance carried silent memories of earlier storms. The marriage that finally joined them was meant to close an old chapter. Instead, It opened another one filled with careful steps. They had to prove stability to a watching nation. They had to move gently around topics that still hurt. Some wounds never healed because they were never discussed openly. Palace life encourages silence. Problems are managed, not explored. Feelings are set aside for duty. Over time, this habit builds quiet tension. Words that should be spoken are stored away. Resentment grows without noise. Smiles appear for cameras while frustration waits behind doors. This pattern shaped many evenings in their private rooms. Public opinion added more weight. Comparisons to the past followed them everywhere. Old headlines were never truly forgotten. Even when people stopped speaking about them, memories remained. That memory lived inside conversations they had alone. It influenced tone, patience, and trust. Charles carried years of criticism about personal choices. Camilla carried years of blame for things beyond her control. Both learned to endure, but endurance is not the same as peace. Endurance requires constant restraint. Peace allows openness. They often lived with the first, rarely the second. Royal duty also changed their relationship. As responsibilities increased, personal time decreased. Schedules filled with meetings, travel, and ceremonies left little room for honest talks. Small misunderstandings stayed unresolved. They waited for better moments that never came. Tiredness made patience weaker. Stress made words sharper. Familiar arguments returned again and again. Each time, they promised to address them later. Later kept moving further away. This is how long tension grows without notice. There were also differences in how they faced problems. Charles prefers reflection and long thought. Camilla prefers direct words and clear expression. These styles sometimes clashed. One would pause while the other wanted answers. That gap created frustration. Neither felt fully heard during difficult talks. Over the years, this difference became familiar. It turned small talks into emotional exchanges. The issue was rarely the true cause. The history behind the issue carried more weight. Staff presence added another layer. Privacy inside a palace is never complete. People move quietly through corridors. Doors open and close without notice. Knowing others are nearby changes how freely someone speaks. Many disagreements were softened because of this. Real feelings waited for rare moments alone. When those moments finally came, emotions were already heavy. Words came out faster and stronger than intended. The weight of history from earlier relationships also lingered. Names from the past were never far from thought. Public memory kept those names alive. This created a silent comparison that neither openly welcomed. It was an invisible guest in many conversations. They did not invite it, yet it remained. That presence made some topics painful to discuss. As years passed, they learned to function around tension instead of removing it. This method works for a time. Eventually, small triggers reopen old feelings. A simple remark can carry decades of meaning. A question can sound like an accusation. Tone becomes more important than words. That is how quiet history turns into sudden conflict. The argument heard in the recording did not begin that night. It began many years earlier. It grew through silence, duty, memory, and pressure. The inner circle. Who knew trouble was brewing? In every royal household, there is a small group of people who see more than the public ever will. They are not family, yet they stand close enough to notice changes in mood, tone, and routine. They hear the pauses in speech. They see the tired eyes after long evenings. For Charles and Camilla, this inner circle has remained steady for years. These are aides, private secretaries, equerry, and trusted companions who understand the rhythm of palace life. They do not speak outside those walls, but they observe everything inside them. Among those often mentioned in royal circles is Clive Alderton, a long-serving private secretary who has worked closely with Charles for many years. His role places him near daily schedules and private moments between duties. People in such positions notice when conversations grow shorter, when patience wears thin, and when silence lasts longer than usual. They see when two people begin to move around each other with care instead of ease. That kind of change does not require words to be understood. There are also longtime companions of Camilla who have known her from before royal life. Friends such as Lady Lansdowne and others within her trusted social circle understand her moods without explanation. They can tell when she is speaking lightly to hide concern. They recognize when laughter is used to avoid a deeper talk. These friends may not be present inside the palace every day, but they hear enough during private visits to sense when tension is building quietly. Senior household staff play another silent role. Valets, dressers, and equerries move in and out of private rooms at set hours. They notice when doors close harder than usual. They hear raised tones through thick walls. They observe when meals are taken separately without clear reason. Over time, patterns form. Those patterns speak louder than any single event. A strained greeting in the morning can reveal what happened the night before. Some senior royals may also have sensed distance growing. Prince William, who works closely with his father on public duties, is known to be observant and careful. While he would never intrude on private matters, he may notice emotional weight during meetings or family gatherings. Princess Anne, practical and direct, is also said to read situations quickly. Years of experience within the family allow her to sense when something is unsettled without needing details. Trusted advisors from Clarence House and Buckingham Palace often act as quiet listeners. They receive remarks that seem casual but carry deeper meaning. A passing comment about tiredness, a complaint about constant pressure, a sigh after a long event. These pieces form a picture over time. They do not create alarm, but they signal that something is not fully at ease. What makes inner circles important is not what they say, but what they understand without saying. They learn to read the space between words. They know when two people are avoiding a topic. They recognize when one person leaves a room to prevent a disagreement. They understand when humor is used to cover irritation. All of this builds a silent awareness that tension exists, even if no one speaks about it openly. Before the alleged incident, small signs may have been visible to these close observers, slight changes in routine. If such a recording truly existed, the inner circle would not be shocked by the emotion. They would recognize it as something they had sensed, building slowly. They would understand the tone because they had heard hints of it before. They would know the history behind the words. But what they know remains inside their minds, locked by duty and loyalty. They carry context the public never receives, and that context may explain far more than the recording itself ever could. What did these silent observers understand long before anyone else suspected trouble was near? If those closest could see the storm forming, how long had the clouds been gathering before anyone else noticed? How the leak reached the media underground. Stories do not always begin in newsrooms. Some begin in quiet corners where information moves without headlines. If a private recording like this ever existed, its path would not be simple. It would move slowly, carefully, through hidden channels before anyone dared to speak about it. The journey from a private device to whispered discussion would require caution, fear, and curiosity all at once. Such a recording would likely begin on a small device not meant for public ears. It could be a phone left active by mistake, a security device misunderstood, or a personal recorder used for another purpose. The person who first hears it would face a difficult choice: share it and risk everything, or keep silent and carry the burden alone. That decision alone would take time. The first step would not be the press. It would be a trusted contact, someone known for handling sensitive information quietly, perhaps a retired journalist, a political aide, or a discreet fixer who operates outside public view. These people form what many call the media underground. They do not publish. They listen, verify, and advise on what should never be released. From there, the recording would be copied carefully. Not sent through open channels but passed through encrypted means or physical exchange. Each person who hears it would add a layer of caution. They would question its source. They would wonder about legal risks. They would ask whether the public interest outweighs the danger of exposure. Whispers would begin in private circles, not in newsrooms, but in quiet offices and late-night calls. A few trusted reporters might be told about its existence without being allowed to hear it. They would be asked for their opinion. Is this publishable? Is this safe? Most would advise against touching it. The legal and ethical weight would be too heavy. Mainstream outlets operate under strict rules. They require proof, consent, and strong public interest. A private argument between senior royals, even if dramatic, may not meet those standards. Editors would fear lawsuits, loss of access, and damage to reputation, so they would step back. They would choose silence over risk. Meanwhile, political figures and advisors might hear rumors through their own networks. Information travels strangely in such circles. The path from private device to whispered knowledge would be slow and careful. Is this truth worth the cost of exposure? Perhaps that is why it never reaches the front page. Perhaps it remains where it began, in shadows where only a few dare to look. But if so many have heard about it without hearing it, what exactly are they afraid the world might discover? Palace damage control behind the scenes. When troubling information reaches palace offices, the reaction is never loud. It is calm, fast, and very quiet. Phones do not ring for long. Messages are short and clear. People who rarely meet at the same time are suddenly called into the same room. Faces remain steady, but minds begin to work quickly. If news of a private recording reached senior aides, this is how the response would begin. The first step would be verification. No one moves without knowing whether the story is real or only rumor. A trusted official would contact a small number of people who might have heard whispers already. Careful questions would be asked. No details would be spoken openly. They would listen for tone, not words. If several sources confirm the same thing, concern would grow silently. Very soon, legal advisors would be contacted. These are people who understand privacy law, media law, and royal protocol. They would study what risks exist if such material were made public. They would ask who might possess it. They would consider how it could be stopped before it spreads further. Their advice would shape every next move. At the same time, private secretaries would review recent events, who had access to certain rooms, which staff were present that evening, whether any device or system could have captured sound without notice. This review would be done without accusation. The goal would be understanding, not blame. Still, the mood would be tense. Silent phone calls would follow. Senior figures would speak in low voices from separate offices. They would not mention names directly. They would speak in careful phrases. Each person would be told only what they needed to know. Information inside the palace travels in small circles to prevent panic. A strategy would slowly form. The aim would not be to fight a story publicly, but to prevent it from becoming a story at all. Discretion would be the main tool. Trusted contacts in media circles might receive gentle reminders about privacy and legal limits. No threats, only firm signals that some lines must not be crossed. At the same time, schedules would continue as normal. Public events would not be canceled without reason. The outside world must see stability. Inside, however, tension would remain. Staff would move carefully. Conversations would be shorter. Everyone would feel the weight of something unseen. Advisors would also prepare statements that might never be used. Simple lines that could be released quickly if questions appeared. These statements would neither confirm nor deny anything. They would focus on respect for privacy and dignity. Having them ready would provide a sense of control. Security teams might quietly check devices and systems, not because they expect to find proof, but because they must rule out every possibility. Any gap, no matter how small, would be examined. This process would be quiet and respectful to avoid suspicion among staff. Throughout this time, the most important goal would be containment. Keep the matter within the smallest possible group. Prevent rumors from spreading beyond those already aware. Time is often the best solution in such situations. If a story does not grow quickly, it can fade away. Days would pass with careful watch. Media reports would be monitored closely. Advisors would read between lines in articles and broadcasts, looking for hints that someone knows more than they should. Each hint would be noted and discussed. Behind closed doors, the palace would not show fear. It would show control, patience, and caution. This is how it has handled sensitive issues for generations, not with noise, but with steady management that few ever notice. But as they work to contain the situation, one question would remain in every mind. Was the effort already too late? If whispers had begun outside, could silence inside still stop the story from reaching the world? The personal fallout between Charles and Camilla. After any serious argument, the air between two people changes. Words may stop, but the feeling remains. If such a private dispute truly occurred, the days that followed would not return to normal easily, even without speaking about it. Both would feel the weight of what was said. Morning routines might become quieter, greetings shorter, eye contact is softer and less frequent. Small habits built over years could shift without notice. One might leave a room earlier than usual. The other might stay behind longer than needed. These small changes often speak louder than direct words. During public events, Both would continue their duties with calm faces. Smiles would appear on cue. Hands would wave. Speeches would be delivered with a steady tone. Yet observers who watch closely might notice slight distance in posture, a pause before walking side by side, a careful space between them during photographs. Private meals might no longer happen at the same time. One could choose to eat later, claiming tiredness. The other might spend more time reading or meeting aides. These are quiet ways people give themselves room to think without causing open conflict. Conversations, when they happen, would be polite and measured. Sensitive topics would be avoided. Safe subjects would replace deeper talks. This helps prevent another argument, but it also creates emotional space that did not exist before. Longtime staff might sense the change quickly. They would notice different requests, slight adjustments in daily plans, a preference for separate engagements where possible. These signs do not confirm anything directly, but they show that comfort has been disturbed. Body language during shared appearances would tell a careful story. Standing close but not touching. Smiling without turning fully toward each other. These details are small, yet meaningful to those who observe royal events closely. At night, each might spend more time alone, one reading quietly, the other spoke with a trusted friend by phone. These moments allow thoughts to settle, but they also show that healing takes time. Despite this, both would understand the importance of unity. They would continue to appear together when required. Duty often comes before personal feelings in royal life. This effort to maintain harmony can hide tension from the public eye. Gradually, normal patterns might begin to return. Shared conversations would grow longer again. Small jokes could reappear. Familiar comfort might slowly replace stiffness. This process is quiet and cannot be rushed. Still, the memory of the argument would remain. Certain words would echo in the mind long after they were spoken. Even if forgiven, they are not easily forgotten. They change how two people understand each other. To outsiders, nothing may seem different. Events continue. Smiles remain. Yet inside, both carry a private memory that shapes their behavior in subtle ways. And as they move forward, a silent thought may linger between them. Can a relationship fully return to ease after words have been said that were never meant to be heard? What this means for the monarchy's stability. The strength of a monarchy often rests on image as much as duty. People look to the royal family and expect calm, unity, and steady behavior. They believe that those at the top must remain composed even in private moments. This belief forms part of the trust that holds the institution together. When that image is questioned, even quietly, the effect can travel far beyond one moment. If a private argument between the king and queen were ever confirmed, it would not be seen as a simple disagreement between two people. It would be viewed as a sign that harmony at the highest level is not as strong as believed. For many, this would create doubt. Not loud doubt, but quiet concern that grows over time. The monarchy depends on public respect. That respect comes from the idea that the family represents stability for the nation. They are expected to rise above ordinary conflict. When they appear human in ways that show tension or anger, the picture changes. People begin to see them not as symbols, but as individuals with problems like anyone else. This shift in view may seem small, but it can affect how the public feels during important moments. National events, ceremonies, and speeches rely on emotional connection between the royals and the people. If trust weakens, that connection becomes less certain. One argument does not break an institution. However, it can add to other past stories that have already shaped public opinion. Over the years, the royal family has faced many personal controversies that drew attention away from duty. Each event leaves a mark. Together, they form a history that people remember. In such a case, the concern would not be about the words alone. It would be about what those words suggest. They would hint that pressure inside the palace is heavier than imagined. They would suggest that even the most prepared individuals can struggle under constant public life. Younger generations, who already question the role of monarchy in modern times, might see this as further reason to doubt its relevance. Older generations, who value tradition deeply, might feel disappointed rather than angry. Both reactions would matter. The palace understands that public feeling is delicate. It cannot be forced or demanded. It must be maintained through careful conduct over many years. That is why even a private moment can have a wide impact if exposed. This situation would also affect how future events are viewed. Every shared appearance between the king and queen might be watched more closely. Every gesture would be studied for signs of tension. This kind of attention can create pressure that did not exist before. At the same time, many people would respond with sympathy. They would recognize that no relationship is perfect. They might appreciate the honesty of seeing leaders as human beings. This reaction could soften the impact rather than worsen it. The true challenge would be balance, keeping dignity while accepting humanity, showing unity without pretending perfection. This is a difficult line to walk in public life. Over time, the moment might fade from attention. New events would replace it, yet the memory would remain in public awareness as part of the larger story of the monarchy during this period.